Good evening everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. Today is 3rd December 2025 and let's start our newspaper analysis. The first topic that we are going to discuss is about security cooperation in the Indian Ocean region through Colombo Security Conclave. And a detailed editorial has been given in the Hindu newspaper, and from the syllabus point of view this could be very important for general studies paper 2, and you can also go through the syllabus topics as well. Now let's understand the importance of Indian Ocean region first. Now in fact, Indian Ocean region is known for, or it is known as, world's busiest waterways. Now in fact, 80% of seaborne oil trade is carried out through the Indian Ocean region. And in fact, for India and all of its neighboring countries, security cooperation is crucial and important in the Indian Ocean region. Because in recent times, issues like maritime crime, strategic competition and development linked vulnerabilities, so not just India but other neighboring countries in the Indian Ocean region have been increasingly facing. So therefore, in this context, it is very important to protect the security in the Indian Ocean region, establish a maritime security architecture. So to ensure the same, Colombo Security Conclave has been emerged as a key platform to strengthen regional coordination and regional cooperation and provide for a security framework in the Indian Ocean region to face the emerging threats. Emerging threats including maritime crime, strategic competition and even development linked vulnerabilities. Now let's understand what is this Colombo Security Conclave and how it has provided for a security architecture in the Indian Ocean region. Now in fact, the Colombo Security Conclave was started in the year 2011, and when it was established, it was a trilateral grouping, meaning India, Sri Lanka and Maldives have come together. They have understood the importance of maritime security and they have become part of this Colombo Security Conclave in the year 2011. However, this Colombo Security Conclave again revived in the year 2020 with a broader mandate, keeping in mind new security threats in the Indian Ocean region. So what are those new security threats? Why in 2020 Colombo Security Conclave has been revived? Because of the maritime security threats, counter-terrorism, drug trafficking, human trafficking and other organized crime networks and cyber security. So because of all these reasons, in 2020 this Colombo Security Conclave has been again revived. However, in 2022, Mauritius joined part of Colombo Security Conclave, followed by Bangladesh in the year 2024. So along with India, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mauritius, Bangladesh also became full-time members of the Colombo Security Conclave. And in fact, recently in 2025, Seychelles also became full member and Malaysia participated as a guest in the Colombo Security Conclave, and it has also showed its interest to become part of the Colombo Security Conclave. However, recently the 7th National Security Advisor Level Colombo Security Conclave Summit took place in 2025. However, this 7th NSA level Colombo Security Conclave Summit is held in India and it was chaired by National Security Advisor Ajit Doval. However, in this 7th NSA level Colombo Security Conclave Summit emphasized on marked expansion, renewed cooperation among all the countries in the Indian Ocean region in general and all the countries in the Colombo Security Conclave in particular. And in fact, they also have extensive discussions on emerging Indian Ocean region threats and new dangers. Right. So in this context, why security cooperation is becoming crucial? So let's understand this aspect as well. Now, Indian Ocean is a vast region, and in fact, Indian Ocean security is also a very important domain. However, at this point of time, there is a fragmented maritime security architecture is existing. Because as of now, the Indian Ocean region lacks a single institutional security framework. So there is an absence of single institutional security framework, and even platforms like Colombo Security Conclave, they help fill this gap through focused cooperation. Now, in fact, all the littoral countries of Indian Ocean region come together and they establish a maritime security architecture. So that will help provide a single institutional security framework to better deal with threats in the Indian Ocean region. And secondly, security cooperation in the Indian Ocean region is important for development security link as well. Now, because the Indian Ocean region's economies depend heavily on oceans for various reasons. For example, energy security, energy imports, trade, tourism, and fisheries. Because of all these reasons also, the littoral countries in the Indian Ocean region wanted to establish a development security link as well. And in fact, there are new maritime threats which are emerging. For example, piracy, illegal unregulated fishing, new climate events, disasters, and they are directly affecting the livelihoods of millions of people and economic stability of these countries in the Indian Ocean region. For example, Maldives economy, over 30% of GDP from tourism. Now, in fact, Maldives as an economy, 30% of its GDP it gets from the tourism alone. So therefore, you can understand how important Indian Ocean is for Maldives. So therefore, along with the development, security is also very important, and in order to ensure both development and security, there is a need for maritime security architecture in the Indian Ocean region. And apart from that, there is also a rising geopolitical competition among the major countries as well in the Indian Ocean region. For example, China has been challenging India's dominance in the Indian Ocean region through projects like Belt and Road Initiative and String of Pearls theory. And in fact, in recent times, Chinese naval presence has also been increasing in the Indian Ocean region, right? So therefore, increasing naval deployments from China and port investments, for example, the Colombo port and other ports, and Belt and Road Initiative of China is a major concern for India going ahead. However, many Colombo Security Conclave members do not view China as a security threat. But for India, China is a security threat. China has been challenging India's traditional dominance in the Indian Ocean region, and it has also been challenging India's net security provider status in the Indian Ocean region. And in fact, many Colombo Security Conclave member countries view China as an economic partner because they heavily dependent on China for economic needs, along with the debt trap diplomacy of China as well. So therefore, there is a strategic divergence between India and the members of Colombo Security Conclave in this context. So what are the key challenges in enhancing cooperation in the region through the Colombo Security Conclave? Now, as we have understood that there are divergent threat perceptions. So divergent threat perceptions actually means that India views China's increasing presence in the Indian Ocean region as a threat. However, many of the Colombo Security Conclave members don't view China as a threat because of their economic dependence on China. So therefore, India prioritizes countering China's naval influence, naval dominance, or naval presence in the Indian Ocean region. However, other member countries in the Colombo Security Conclave, so they focus more on developmental cooperation with China. So therefore, this is a divergence, and this could be considered as a major challenge in the Indian Ocean region. And then we should also focus on need for strengthening, need for institutional strengthening. Because currently, the Colombo Security Conclave works at the National Security Advisory level to understand threats. However, there is a need for more structured framework, such as regular ministerial meetings, joint trainings, combined maritime operations needed. So all these things will help in institutional strengthening of the Colombo Security Conclave. And apart from that, the domestic political uncertainty is also another major problem in most of the member countries of Colombo Security Conclave. For example, the political volatility, instability in countries like Bangladesh may affect the continuity and commitment of those countries in the Colombo Security Conclave. However, what should be the way forward in this context? So if we talk about the way forward, so we need to build an institutional resilience. So how can we build institutional resilience? Now, it can be built through establishing a permanent secretariat for the Colombo Security Conclave member countries, and there is a need for shared maritime domain awareness, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, and there is also a need for constituting a joint task force as well. And apart from that, we should also increase inclusive cooperation. So inclusive cooperation should also involve regional bodies like Indian Ocean Rim Association and Bay of Bengal Initiative for multi-sectoral technical and economic cooperation. And there is also need to engage like-minded partners like Malaysia and even African littoral states. So this will make the cooperation among the Colombo Security Conclave member countries an inclusive cooperation. And it is also a broad-based cooperation among all the member countries. And then the focus should be on balancing development with security, because we have understood that the economies of several other countries in the Colombo Security Conclave heavily dependent on tourism, energy security, trade, and fisheries. At the same time, the maritime security has also facing new threats such as piracy, drug trafficking, human trafficking, organized crime networks, terrorism, and even climate change as well. So therefore, there is a need to promote blue economy by all these countries through partnerships, and climate resilience need to be achieved, and capacity building for smaller island nations as well. And for that particular purpose, India has already launched Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, CDRI. And in fact, India has also launched another program called IRIS. So infrastructure resilience for small island developing states. Right, so all these programs can be leveraged to build capacities among these countries. So finally, the security cooperation in the Indian Ocean region is important and essential, because to address non-traditional security threats and preserve economic stability and also manage the geopolitical competition in the Indian Ocean region. However, the Colombo Security Conclave's expansion, addition of new members into this Colombo Security Conclave, renewed focus offers a promising step towards creating more cohesive, stable, inclusive, secure Indian Ocean region. Right? So I hope you have understood this, and let's move on to another topic, which is why there is no peace in Ukraine. This is also a very important editorial which has been given in the Hindu newspaper, and from the syllabus point of view, this could be important for gender studies paper too. So let's understand why there is no peace in Ukraine. Now first understand the background of it before going into it. So in fact, we all knew that Russia has launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Even though Russia has called this as a special military operation, but Russia was launched this in February 2022 against Ukraine. And in fact, when Russia launched this invasion, Russia expected a quick victory over Ukraine. However, Ukraine has resisted this invasion attempt by Russia in a very strong way. And in fact, after this confrontation between Russia and Ukraine, early talks began in Belarus and later in Istanbul, March 2022. However, the tentative settlement was discussed in these talks. Now, in fact, Russia to withdraw pre-war lines and retaining Crimea and parts of Donetsk and Luhansk. And in return, Ukraine must give up NATO membership in exchange for the security guarantees for Ukraine from Russia. So in fact, the tentative settlement was discussed these aspects. However, the talks collapsed, the process collapsed due to lack of Western guarantees and Kyiv's confidence after Russia withdrew from areas around the Kyiv. So because of all these factors, the early talks were collapsed. Now let's understand the key reasons peace has not been achieved in the Ukraine. Now first thing that we should understand that there are conflicting territorial claims between both Ukraine and Russia. So this could be one reason, because Russia has formally annexed 5 regions such as Crimea in the year 2014, Donetsk and Luhansk, Zaporozhye and Kherson in the year 2022, when it has started a full-scale invasion against Ukraine. However, Ukraine has been insisting on full territorial integrity, including Crimea. So even though Russia has formally annexed all these regions which earlier belonged to Ukraine, but Ukraine has been insisting on full territorial integrity, and that they are also insisting on territorial integrity over Crimea, which has been annexed way back in the year 2014 by Russia. So for example, as of 2024, Russia controls around 20% of pre-2014 Ukraine territory. So therefore, the conflicting territorial claims between Ukraine and Russia, this could be a one factor. Continuation of the conflict between these two countries. The second factor is collapse of negotiations. So earlier we have understood that when Russia launched a full-scale invasion against Ukraine, so in 2022 March, Istanbul Peace Framework has started. However, this Istanbul Peace Framework was the closest that both sides came to a compromise. However, this Istanbul Peace Framework was failed because of some reasons. So what are those reasons? The Western countries hesitated to give strong security guarantees to Ukraine. Now, in fact, Ukraine wanted the security guarantees from the Western countries, including US. However, the Western countries are not ready to provide security guarantees to Ukraine. First reason. The second reason, United Kingdom Prime Minister at that point of time, Boris Johnson, reportedly encouraged Kyiv, which is Ukraine, to continue fighting. He don't want Ukraine to give up against Russia. He wanted Ukraine should continue fighting against Russia. Now, why European countries have been involved into this? For European countries, security from Russia is very important. So European countries also believed that Russia may continue its expansionism, may continue its aggression against the European countries as well. So therefore, in order to ensure European security, the European countries started encouraging Ukraine to fight against Russia. However, Ukraine believed that Russia's withdrawal from Kyiv showed the weakness. So because of all these reasons, the Istanbul Peace Framework was failed in 2022. However, the battlefield reality has also been shifting over a period of time, because Russia reported and adopted a long-term war strategy. Initially, when Russia started this invasion against Ukraine, Russia believed that they may achieve a quick victory. However, over a period of time, Russia has changed its battlefield strategy and it has regrouped and adopted a long-term war strategy against Ukraine. However, in 2023, Ukraine's counter-offensive against Russia has failed, and that closed the option for the military victory. However, example is Russia captured Pokrovsk, which is also known as Donetsk, and made gains near Kupiansk, Kharkiv in 2025. However, so US policy towards this Russia-Ukraine conflict has also been changing. When Joe Biden was the president of United States strongly supported Ukraine's cause and its territorial integrity. As long as it takes, US will continue supporting Ukraine. So this was the stance of United States when Joe Biden was the president of US. However, when Donald Trump came to power in 2025, US pushed for negotiations. US wanted a negotiated settlement to end this conflict between Ukraine and Russia. However, US has been pushing Ukraine to have an agreement with Russia that may be less favorable for Ukraine. Recently, Donald Trump also came up with 28-point Trump plan. And in fact, this Trump plan demands a recognition of Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk as de facto Russian territories, which is not acceptable for Ukraine because Ukraine wanted a full territorial integrity over all the regions, including Crimea as well. However, Ukraine to withdraw troops, limit army size, and constitutionally reject NATO membership. So this is what the 28-point Trump plan has demanded from Ukraine. So it may be not acceptable for Ukraine to accept all these things. However, the weak Ukrainian position as of now, because Ukraine has been facing a lot of challenges, including frontline setbacks such as loss of Pokrovsk and internal instability such as corruption scandals, Zelensky's ruling under the martial law, and even the economic stress and dependent on Western aid as well. Because Ukraine's grid has faced repeated outages after Russian strikes on power plants. So internally also Ukraine has been facing numerous and number of challenges. However, there are certain geopolitical factors also which comes into picture. For example, Russia opposes NATO expansion. As of now, almost all the member countries of Europe are became part of NATO. Earlier, Norway, Sweden, Finland, those countries were not ready to be part of NATO, but after Russia's invasion against Ukraine, those countries are also ready to be part of NATO. And in fact, Ukraine still hopes for a future European Union integration. Ukraine wanted a NATO membership, and it also wanted Ukraine to be integrated into the European Union architecture. However, Russia is strongly against this. Russia don't want that Ukraine should be integrated with European Union, and Russia also don't want that Ukraine should also be part of NATO. However, US strategic community debates a reverse Kissinger approach. So reverse Kissinger approach involves drawing Russia close to US away from China. So this approach is known as reverse Kissinger approach. However, European nations remain supportive but cannot replace US military leadership in this context. However, because of all these reasons, peace remains elusive in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Because of military, political, geopolitical incentives, they do not align. Ukraine cannot reclaim the territory by force from Russia, and Russia seeks recognition of its gains, all the territories that it has already conquered or annexed, and Western unity is also weakening because US President Donald Trump 28-point Trump's plan. So it is less favorable to Ukraine. So there are differences between US and European countries over Ukraine. In contrast to 2022, Ukraine is negotiating from a much weaker position now. So therefore, making this a balanced and lasting peace agreement extremely difficult to achieve, and that's why there is no peace in Ukraine. So I hope you have understood this. And next very important topic is about the electoral reforms in India. Electoral reforms, a very important topic, and this has been given in the Hindu newspaper, and from the syllabus point of view this could be very important for General Studies paper 2. So let's understand about the electoral reforms and its demand in India. And in fact, free and fair elections, considered as foundation of Indian democracy, and free and fair elections are included in the basic structure of the Indian Constitution. However, the electoral process faces challenges such as money power, criminalization, weak regulation, and even declining trust as well. So this is primarily because of lack of electoral reforms which could address all these problems. However, electoral reforms are essential to ensure transparency, inclusiveness, credibility of election process, and also conduct elections in a free and fair manner. However, in order to achieve electoral reforms, implement those electoral reforms, Election Commission of India plays a very important role. Now, in fact, Election Commission of India is a constitutional body, and it administers elections to Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, state legislative assemblies, including state legislative councils, office of the president, and office of the vice president. It was established on 25th January 1950, which is considered as National Voters' Day. And in fact, the Election Commission of India is mentioned in Part 15 of the Constitution from Article 324 to 329. So if we talk about the structure of the Election Commission of India, and it consists of a Chief Election Commissioner and 2 other election commissioners who are appointed by the President of India. The tenure of the election commissioner and other chief election commissioner and other election commissioner is 6 years or 65 years of age, whichever is earlier. However, the retiring election commissioners are eligible for further appointment by the government. And in fact, the chief election commissioner can be removed by a resolution on the ground of proved misbehavior and incapacity, and on the same grounds and in the same manner as the judge of the Supreme Court. So let's understand the key electoral reforms which are required in India. Now, in fact, there is a need for political funding reforms. So when we talk about the political funding reforms, there is a need for greater transparency in political donations. Donations made by the private individuals to the political parties. Because in 2024, Supreme Court struck down the electoral bond scheme which has introduced in the year 2017 to bring transparency and accountability in the electoral bond process. However, the electoral bond scheme was struck down by the Supreme Court because it lacks transparency. Right? So, however, India requires a real-time digital disclosure of donations. And in fact, there should be a certain limit and cap on the corporate funding, and strong auditing of party finances is also required. In 22-23, over 55% of the political parties' income came from unknown sources. So it is very important to know what are those unknown sources, because there might be a collusion between the corporates and the political parties. The political parties which are in power may act against the interests of the public and may act in favor of these corporates as well if they receive greater funding from the corporates. So therefore, there is a need for greater transparency in the electoral funding. And secondly, curbing criminalization of politics is also the need of the hour. According to Association for Democratic Reforms, 43% of the MPs in 2019 Lok Sabha had criminal cases pending against them. So this is a very serious issue because the criminals are entering into the law-making bodies. So lawbreakers are becoming lawmakers. So therefore, this is a very serious issue, and there is a need for mandatory disqualification for serious offences, not just 6 years. And there is a need to establish fast-track courts and special courts to try cases pending against the MPs and MLAs. And we should also strengthen the Election Commission of India as an independent constitutional body. Now, in fact, the appointment process must be transparent and independent. There should be minimal interference of the government when it comes to the appointment of Chief Election Commissioner and other election commissioners. And in fact, all election commissioners should have a fixed tenure. And financial autonomy for Election Commission of India should be given, and there should be an independent secretariat for the Election Commission of India as well. However, Supreme Court's 2023 judgment sought a committee-based selection until Parliament enacts a law which mandates the selection of or appointment of the Election Commission, Chief Election Commissioner and other election commissioners. And there is also a need for reforms regulating social media and hate speech as well. For example, rules to curb misinformation and deep fakes during the election process, a model code for political advertising on digital platforms, and there is also a need for giving statutory backing to the model code of conduct. And in fact, automatic voter registration must be linked with Aadhaar to delete the fake voters, the ghost voters, and also remote voting options for internal migrants. In fact, 45 crore internal migrants are in India. So therefore, remote voting provides them an opportunity to cast their vote and become part of the election process. And we should also include the non-resident Indias, because only 1.25 lakh voted in 2019 despite over 1 crore overseas Indians. So this should also be kept in mind. And apart from that, there is a need to conduct simultaneous polls throughout simultaneous elections, one nation, one election, because this could reduce the expenditure and this would also ensure that the country is not always in the election mode. However, let's understand some challenges to the electoral reforms, achieving electoral reforms. So firstly, there is a huge political resistance because parties benefit from this opaque funding, unknown funding sources. Parties can get more sources and they can benefit. So because of that reason, the political parties generally resist any transparency in the political funding. And in fact, the political parties also resist laws regulating finances and criminalization. And then legal and constitutional hurdles for this. For example, to conduct simultaneous elections, it requires the constitutional amendments and it also requires new laws as well. So therefore, it is a legal and constitutional hurdle or a difficulty. Then social divisions and identity politics. For example, caste and religion based mobilization makes regulation of hate speech very difficult. And then the administrative limitations, for example, implementation of remote voting, digital ID linked rules, and even nationwide transparency system. So all these factors actually require high level coordination and investment as well. Now, how to bring a meaningful electoral reforms in India? In order to bring a meaningful electoral reforms, there is a need for a legislative action and there is also a need for the political will as well. So for that particular purpose, Parliament must enact clear laws on funding, candidate eligibility and oversight. And then Election Commission of India must be empowered in this context, because the Election Commission of India is a constitutional independent body, so therefore it must be given power similar to Comptroller and Auditor General of India or UPSC. So therefore, Election Commission of India can function as a full independent body with a financial autonomy as well. And apart from that, there is a need for judicial oversight as well. So judicial oversight in the sense that why don't we establish a fast track courts to try criminal cases pending against MPs and MLAs. For electoral offences also, there is a need to establish a fast track courts and special courts, and there should be strict penalties for the violation of the model code of conduct. And apart from that, the model code of conduct should also be given a legal backing as well for its effective enforcement. And here, civil society should be given a larger role. For example, Organization for Association for Democratic Reforms, media, voter groups. So they inform voters about the choices, and it also help push for greater transparency in the election process. And there is a need to find out technology-driven solutions for conducting free and fair elections, including AI-enabled misinformation detection and digital voter services and even blockchain-based donation tracking. So therefore, there is a need to bring in all these important reforms in the election process. And the next very important topic that has been given in the Hindu newspaper about the implementation of Jal Jeevan scheme. So let's understand the Jal Jeevan mission. So this topic says, center says UP reported maximum complaints over the Jal Jeevan mission projects. So from the syllabus point of view, this could be important for General Studies paper 2, General Studies paper 3, and in fact it is also important for the prelims examination as well. So let's understand what is this Jal Jeevan mission. So Jal Jeevan mission has been launched in the year 2019 August, and the objective of the Jal Jeevan mission is to provide a functional household tap connection to every rural household by the year 2024 is the objective of Jal Jeevan mission. And in fact, this mission is implemented by Ministry of Jal Shakti with the vision of Har Ghar Jal. However, let's understand the key objectives of Jal Jeevan mission. Now, if you look at the key objectives of Jal Jeevan mission, ensure safe and adequate drinking water through household tap connections, and promote community participation in planning, implementation, management of the Jal Jeevan mission. And at the same time, there is a need to focus on source sustainability using groundwater recharge, rainwater harvesting, and even the grey water management, water recycling as well, and in fact improve health outcomes by reducing the waterborne diseases among the people, particularly the vulnerable sections of the society. Right, so that's all for today, and thank you so much. So please subscribe our YouTube channel and also like the video. Thank you.